Sanhedrin. I just want to add that he's a published scholar in many different publications, including Journal of Halacha and Contemporary Society, the Jewish Bible Quarterly, Kovetz HaMaor, and Kovetz Kol HaTorah. He lectures, he writes, he's a brilliant man, and he's today coming to us with a fascinating topic that most of us probably don't know that much about, at least I don't. I speak it for myself. He's going to be giving us, the name of his book that he wrote is God versus Gods. And he's going to be speaking to us about the history of idolatry. Why was there such a lure towards Avodah Zarah? Why were people attached to it? And what is considered Avodah Zarah and what is not considered Avodah Zarah? He has so much to talk about, so I'm sure our question and answer period afterwards will be fascinating. Without further ado, I want to introduce Rav Klein, Rav Reuven Klein.
Thank you. Rabbi Klein, I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to mute all of the participants so we have better sound.
All right, sounds good to me. Thank you very much. It's mamish an honor. I was invited to speak over here. Thank you to Mrs. Frank and Mrs. Iskovich. Is that how you pronounce it?
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you guys for hosting me and arranging all the technical details, etc. This is my book on Avodah Zarah. If we get enough people, maybe we can do some sort of sale together. I could send some copies to Bet Shemesh and you guys could pick it up. I sell it for 85 shekel. In the stores, it's like 100 shekel or whatever. This is my first book, which is out of print right now, but this is on the history of Lashon HaKodesh. It's actually very interesting that you invited me to speak specifically this week with Parsha Shlach, because in this week's Parsha, it talks about a special korban that a person has to bring, a special type of korban chatas that a person has to bring if he violates the prohibition of Avodah Zarah. So, this is the only prohibition or only Isser in the Torah that you bring a special type of korban chatas for, which differs from all the other types of korban chatases that are brought. So that's in Parsha Shlach, so it's like appropriate that we're going to speak about Avodah Zarah specifically in this week. As the introduction said, we're going to focus today on what was the lure of Avodah Zarah, what drove people towards idolatry, and what made it actually happen, and why did people actually do this. My book on Avodah Zarah, this is really what I consider the first volume of the book, and this book really focuses on the history of Avodah Zarah. It goes through the entire Tanakh and explains, different things, what was happening, how people worshipped Avodah Zarah in different ways, what the Jews were or weren't doing in different time periods, just focusing on the historical aspect and focusing specifically on the period of Tanakh. I'm Bezras Hashem working on a second volume, which is going to focus more on let's say the philosophy of Avodah Zarah versus Judaism, or the ideology of what do they believe versus what do we believe, things like that. Looks like there's somebody waiting to enter the room. Okay, somebody should take care of that. So more of a philosophical way of setting up the dispute or the difference of opinion between what they term monotheism and polytheism. If you're familiar with those terms, so monotheism means mono is one and theism is God, or belief in God. So monotheism is the belief in one God, versus polytheism, like a polygon is has many sides. So poly means many. Polytheism means the belief in many gods. Right? So that's our sort of point of departure, this idea of polytheism versus monotheism. We like to say that Judaism believes in monotheism. Judaism is a monotheistic religion, meaning we believe in one God. But the truth is that in the scholarly academic world, so they have a bit of a hard time saying this, because they look at Judaism, they open up a Tanakh, or they open up Midrashim and things like that, and they see, well, there's actually a whole cast of divine characters that come up. It's not just one God. There's also Malachim, there's also Shadim, there's also the Satan. So there's all these different other things going on. So how does that jive with the understanding that Judaism is considered a monotheistic religion? These cast of characters, these angels and demons and Satan, all these different things that come up, seem to suggest that Judaism believes in multiple divine characters. So how do we work this out? So Be'ezras Hashem, I'm going to give an introduction to resolve this issue. And then from that, we can start understanding a little bit more the lore of idolatry, and then we'll speak more in depth about the lore of idolatry and what drove people towards Avodah Zarah. This is, what we would call, Jewish philosophy 101. Jewish philosophy 101 already resolves this issue and explains to us why Judaism looks at itself as monotheistic, even though it also, we believe in, the powers of Malachim and Shedim and other things like that. We understand, according to our hashkafa and according to our traditions, we understand that what Hashem wants to do is Hashem created the world in order to be meitiv. Hashem created the world in order to give of His good to others. Right? Hashem wants to give others from His good, from His eternal good to other people or to other entities besides Himself. Right? Because Hashem Himself is totally good. Ta'amu ru'u ki tov Hashem. If you think about it, ta'amu, if you think about it, you will see that Hashem is good. And the hallmark of somebody who is good is that he does good to others as well. Now, Hashem doesn't want to give a person just any old, plain old good. Hashem wants to give a person the best type of good that a person can possibly receive. And the best type of good that a person can possibly receive is a good that he deserves. There's a famous idea called, in Kabbalistic terms, the Nahama de Kisufa, the bread of embarrassment. The bread of embarrassment is when Hashem gives somebody a present, let's say bread, but he's embarrassed because he doesn't really deserve it. So Hashem is giving a person good, but it's not the best type of good because a person feels bad about it afterwards because it's something that he doesn't really deserve, so he's embarrassed. So Hashem wants to give somebody a good, the best type of good that he's going to deserve. And if he deserves it, he won't be embarrassed of it, and therefore it's going to be the best type of good that Hashem can give a person. So how does that come about? How do you get this best type of good? How do you deserve good? So the way you deserve good is by making good decisions and doing the right thing. Right? So in order to achieve that end, Hashem gave mankind this power called the power of Bechira, the power of choice. Hashem said, look, I'm going to give man the ability to choose his own destiny. He's going to choose whether he wants to do good or he wants to do not good. He wants to do bad. Hashem gives a person a choice. You want to do good or you want to do evil. Hashem puts in front of us the good and the bad. So you can choose good or bad, life or death. Hashem allows a person to choose. And therefore, when a person chooses the right path, a person chooses to do something good, then he deserves the special tov that Hashem is going to give him. And then when he gets tov from Hashem, so then he really deserves it. And then he's getting the best type of tov that's possible. So the idea of the koach of bechira, of freedom of choice, or what philosophers call free will, is that it gives a person a chance to get the best type of good from Hashem. Hashem creates this situation or this balance of you can choose good or you can choose bad, so that a person will choose good and he won't choose bad, and then because he chooses good, he will get the best tov that he deserves from Hashem. That's more or less Jewish philosophy 101. That's the concept of bechira, of freedom of will, and that's what Hashem does in order to be able to give a person the best type of good that he deserves. Chazal also allude to this idea in different places. They say that by Brias Ha'olam, it says that when Hashem created man, it says Vayar Hashem ki tov ma'od. It says man was very good. So the Medrash in Bereshis Rabbah says, what does it mean tov ma'od? So tov ze Yetzer tov, ma'od ze Yetzer HaRa. Why is tov? The inclination that a person is sort of pushed in the direction of good, and Ma'od, when it says that Hashem saw that it was very good, the word very alludes to the Yetzer HaRa. How does the word very allude to the Yetzer HaRa? What does the Yetzer HaRa have to do with very good? So the idea is that the possibility that a person has that he could choose Ra, he's open to choosing Ra, but he doesn't, that makes it that the good that he gets is going to be even better. It's going to make the good very good because he now deserves good because he had a chance to choose evil and he rejected the possibility of evil by choosing good. Yeah, are you guys following with me? Can I hear any comments or something? I think
you're explaining it very clearly. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think if you press space and it temporarily unmutes you, something like that. Is that true?
No, you have a small microphone at the bottom left of your screen. Now, every person has the opportunity to click on that, and then they can unmute themselves.
Okay. Now, fine. Now, so this is sort of what I said, Jewish philosophy 101. Now, the question is like this. Who has the power of Bechira? Who can make decisions of their own? Who has the power of making independent decisions, and who has this choice where they can choose to do good, they can do bad, and then if they do good, they get the ultimate good from Hashem. Who has this power? So the way we understand it is that Hashem gave this power of Bechira only to mankind. Only man has this power. And of course, Hashem himself has this power, right? It says that Hashem created man, B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of Hashem. So the Nefesh HaChaim explains that man is created in the image of Hashem in the sense that just like Hashem has absolute Bechira, Hashem has absolute ability to make choices and decisions that affect the entirety of creation. So Hashem also gave man the opportunity to make choices and decisions that can also affect the world. Now, obviously, there's a big difference between Hashem's ability to make choices, which is absolute, and man's ability to make choices, which is a little bit more limited. But the point is that man, in some small way, resembles Hashem, that man has this ability to make choices, that man has what we call the koyach ha-bechira, the power of free will, which no other creation has besides Hashem and man. Just Hashem and man. No other animal, creature, celestial body, angel, constellation, Satan, demon, Yetzer HaRa, none of these forces, none of these things that they exist, but they don't have an independent power, they don't have an independent ability to make their own decisions. Okay? There are some sources that seem to suggest that angels and or Shadim have independent ability to make decisions, and they have to some extent Bechira, just like man does, but those sources seem to be out of the consensus, and the consensus seems to say that no, only man and Hashem have Bechira, no animals, no angels, no celestial bodies, Shadim, none of these things have Bechira, only Hashem has Bechira, ultimate Bechira Hashem has, and man has also Bechira in a somewhat limited fashion. Okay? Now, once we understand this, we can much better understand what we're saying when we say that Judaism is a monotheistic religion. Yes, Judaism believes in Hashem, and there's only one Hashem, and Hashem's powers are absolute, and that's what we believe in. And we also believe that there are other things as well. There are angels, and there are Shadim, and other things, but those other forces don't have the ability to make their own independent decisions. They don't have Bechira like man and Hashem does. They're totally subservient to Hashem. They're sort of, we can say, there's different ways you can phrase it, but you can say that angels, let's say, are tools that Hashem uses, right? Like a hammer, for example. Like let's say a marshal, right? Let's say a hammer. So if I take a hammer, this is not a hammer, but it's a pen, but it's the same idea, right? The hammer doesn't make its own choice to decide, you know what? I don't like that nail over there. I'm going to go start banging that nail. No, somebody who has the ability to make decisions will pick up the hammer and start using the hammer in the way that he wants to use the hammer. Right? The hammer itself has no power. It's let's say the force of impact that a person holding the hammer uses, and he's the one who decides how to use the hammer. So the same thing, a malach doesn't have its own independent way of making decisions. A malach is sort of just, it's a hammer that Hashem uses, or a tool that Hashem uses in running the world. I heard from the great American Kabbalist, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. So Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, he's really quoting a Ramak by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. He's talking about spheros, the different ways that Hashem manifests his character traits in this world. So that's the spheros. So Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan says that spheros don't actually exist. They're not independent existing entities. They're actually just windows. They're like a window. A window doesn't really exist. A window is sort of just a way of dividing between here and there. There's a window between the inside and outside. So there's a window that divides us. But the window itself is not actually its own independent place. It's just a way of going from inside to outside or outside to inside. So he says the same thing that malach or sphera, all these different things, they don't contradict monotheism, because we believe there's only one Hashem. But the way that Hashem is mashpia, the way that Hashem influences the world, so Hashem sends his influence sort of through pipelines or through different channels, and those spheros or those angels that are different ways that Hashem will channel what he wants to do in the world, they're tools or channels or pipelines, however you want to phrase it. So those are not independent entities. They're just following what Hashem wants, and they're doing exactly what Hashem wants. Hashem is just using them as sort of tools to bring about what he wants in the world. Yeah, you're following with me? Okay. It's sort of like if you want to, thumbs up. If you want to give a mashal, so you can compare it to like the sun. Right? The sun has the power to do good, and the sun has the power to do bad. But it's really, the sun the sun doesn't actually have those powers. Right? The sun causes, let's say, the sun can cause skin cancer. It's not that the sun itself decides, I'm going to give skin cancer to this person and not to that person. No, the sun doesn't make those decisions. The sun is just a means for Hashem to do what Hashem wants in the world. Right? The sun also has the power to make plants grow. So the sun is not going to say, well, I want this plant to grow, but I don't want that plant to grow. No, Hashem makes those decisions. The sun doesn't make those independent decisions. Hashem makes the decisions. The sun is just a means for bringing out those decisions. It's just a tool that Hashem uses for making those decisions. Okay? So that's how we understand that when we say that Judaism is monotheistic, so Judaism believes in one God, and Hashem may use those tools or those windows to channel his shefa into the world and to do exactly the way he wants it to come out, but those don't have any independent, they have no independent bechira. They don't have any ability to make their own decisions. They follow whatever Hashem's decisions are. Because as we said, only man has the capacity of bechira, to make his own choices, and Hashem has the capacity to make his own choices. So that's our point of departure. That's our sort of introduction. That's how we understand that Judaism is monotheistic versus polytheistic. Now, we want to understand now, how do you explain the story of Job? It's a good question, because in the story of Eov, so it looks like the Satan has sort of independent powers from Hashem. That Hashem doesn't really want to punish Eov, but the Satan sort of convinces him, and then Hashem goes through it. But the truth is that the Satan is a creation that Hashem created. Because just like Hashem created the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer HaRa, because Hashem wants a person to have something pushing him in the direction of good and something pushing him in the direction of evil, so that a person will have an equal chance to choose good or bad, and Hashem hopes he's going to choose good so that he'll get the ultimate Tov. So Hashem also created angels like the Satan, or the Satan, that push a person in different directions, or that might push Hashem's Ratzon in different directions, but ultimately Hashem is the one making the decision. You don't have to answer all questions if it takes you off topic to your discretion. Okay. Thank you for that. No, but it's an important question, how to understand the story of Eov. But the way we understand it is that Hashem gave the Satan a certain job. Just like Hashem gave the Yetzer HaRa a certain job, the Yetzer HaRa is not working against Hashem. the Yetzer HaRa is working for Hashem. Hashem wants the Yetzer HaRa to tell a person to do Averas, so that a person will be pushed towards the direction of doing Averas in one way, and have also be pushed by the Yetzer Tov in a different direction to do mitzvahs, so that now you have sort of a clarity of mind. You have something push you in one direction, something push you in another direction, and they're sort of equal forces. And then you can make your own decision which way you want to take it. Right? This is actually directly related to what we're going to speak about right now. What was the lure of Avodah Zarah? What drove people towards doing Avodah Zarah, and what made them, what in the world possessed them to doing such a thing? Okay, so basically we're going to discuss 10 different approaches to what was the lure for Avodah Zarah, how they understood what they were doing when people did Avodah Zarah, and what sort of desires they were really fulfilling when they were worshiping Avodah Zarah. We're gonna explain 10 different ways of looking at it. Be'ezus Hashem. But by way of introduction, we're gonna say like this. One of the things that Hashem created, we were talking about the Satan, we're talking about the Yetzer HaRa, so there is a special Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah. Hashem created a special Yetzer HaRa that pushes a person in the direction of Avodah Zarah. Because the truth is that if you really think goodly about it, if you really think well about it, you'll realize that Avodah Zarah makes absolutely no sense, it's completely illogical, and there's really nothing to it. So why would a person ever want to worship Avodah Zarah? And how could Hashem say, don't worship Avodah Zarah? Nobody in their right mind would really worship Avodah Zarah, right? So why would this whole concept of Avodah Zarah even exist in the first place? So the answer is that Hashem created a Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah, a special Yetzer HaRa which pushes a person in the direction of Avodah Zarah. The problem is that we can't really relate to this because the Gemara tells us, I speak about this but at great length in chapter 7 in my book, the Gemara tells us that the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah no longer exists. We don't have this Yetzer HaRa anymore. We don't have the evil inclination pushing us in the direction of Avodah Zarah. It doesn't exist anymore. Chazal got rid of it in the beginning of the Second Temple period, beginning of Bayis Sheni. There's a whole story in the Gemara. If you get my book and you see chapter 7, there's a whole chapter about this. What exactly does that mean that there's no Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah? A lot of different discussions, but I don't want to get into that right now. But the point is that there's something called the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah, which pushes a person in the direction of doing Avodah Zarah. So the question is, what exactly is this Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah? And somebody wrote, today that would be a drive for money. I know that people like to say that the Yetzer HaRa that nowadays money is Avodah Zarah, but I wouldn't say that so quickly. I would say it in a more nuanced way. I would say that money has a lot of conceptual similarities to Avodah Zarah, but I wouldn't say that money is Avodah Zarah. Right? Let's say, Lamashal, if you go and you take out a credit card and there's witnesses and they warn you, do not take out a credit card, and they warned you, and there's witnesses, and they go to Bezdin, you're not going to be Chayav Misa because you took out a credit card and you're pursuing money. Right? So the pursuit of money is not actually Avodah Zarah. It may be similar to Avodah Zarah that people tend to look at money or the pursuit of money as something that goes above everything else. It goes above keeping the Torah, keeping the mitzvahs, and a person's relationship with Hashem. So in that way, it's similar to Avodah Zarah, but I wouldn't say that money is Avodah Zarah. So you have to sort of be careful in what you're going to say is Avodah Zarah and what you're going to say is similar to Avodah Zarah. Anyways, so what I was saying is that there's this concept called the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah. There's a very illuminating story in the Gemara. The Gemara talks about in Masechah Sanhedrin. So the last parak of Sanhedrin talks about Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelik le'olam haba shenemar v'yamech kulam tzadikim netzem matoy matzi yodei lehispar. Every Jew has a chelik in olam haba. Right? It brings a pasuk. Every Jew has a place in olam haba. And then the Mishnah continues and says, Ve'elu she'en lam chelik olam haba. And then we're going to give you a list of people that don't have a portion in olam haba. And the Mishnah talks about 3 kings that are mentioned in Sefer Malachim and 4 non-kings. Okay. So one of the kings that's mentioned in the Mishnah is Menashe. Right? King Menashe, he was one of the longest lasting kings of Malchus Yehuda, comes up in the Sefer Malachim, in the Book of Kings, So he was one of the kings that was mentioned in the Mishnah. So the Gemara relates that one of the Amoraic sages, one of the Amoraim, Rav Ashi, was once giving a shir about these different, about this Mishnah, about which people have Olam Haba and which people don't have Olam Haba. And then at the end of the shir, he said that, tomorrow we're going to start discussing, our friend. We're going to discuss our friends. And the way that's understood was that he was sort of implying that the kings that are mentioned in that Mishnah are Rav Ashi's equals, our friends. We're going to talk about them in tomorrow's shir. That's what Rav Ashi says. So it said that, that night, Rav Ashi had a dream, and this king Menashe, who was a big Oived of Avodah Zarah, who lost his chelik in Olam Haba, he came to Rav Ashi in a dream, and he basically showed Rav Ashi that, no, he's not Rav Ashi's equal, he's actually surpasses Rav Ashi in his understanding of Torah and his knowledge of Torah. He showed Rav Ashi a halacha that Rav Ashi wasn't aware of, and basically Rav Ashi says, okay, so if you're so smart, if you're such a big Talmid Chacham, O King Menashe, so why was it that you were Oived of Avodah Zarah? And Menashe says, you don't understand. In the time that I lived, the drive for Avodah Zarah was so strong that if you would have lived then, you would have lifted up your frock to go run do Avodah Zarah. And that's what the Gemara brings, the story of Menashe and Rav Ashi. So it's sort of telling us that it's very hard for us to judge what was driving people back then and what was the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah that was pushing people in that direction. But it was a different reality than the reality that we're used to nowadays. Okay, that's one point about the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah. The Chazon Ish, I bring down in my book also from the Chazon Ish, that the Chazon Ish compares us trying to understand what the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah was to trying to, if you have a blind person and you're trying to explain to a blind person, the concept of colors. So the Chazon Ish says that the blind person, he doesn't even understand what it means to see b'chlal in any way. In any way whatsoever. So he doesn't understand the concept of seeing. He's surely not going to understand the concept of colors, to differentiate between different things that you see. So he says. So the Chazon Ish says that it's the same thing with the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah. We're so far removed from it that we don't understand what's going on at all. That's what the Chazon Ish says. And there's other people that echo that understanding. But at least we're going to try to understand as much as we can, so we can have a little bit of a mastery over the subject. What was the lure for Avodah Zarah? One of the early, not early Mekubalim, but one of the Mekubalim, he lived, his name is Rabbi Aviad Sar Shalom. He lived in Italy in the 1600s, a real Renaissance man. So he wrote a sefer called Emunas Chachamim. It's a sefer, it's an important, do I have it somewhere here? Oh, here, look at that. It was recently reprinted. Emunas Chachamim. So Rav Aviad Sar Shalom, one of the things that he's trying to do in his sefer is he's trying to defend the concept of Kabbalah against these people who are, let's say, very rationalist and reject the concept of Kabbalah. And he talks a lot about different Kabbalistic concepts or whatever, but what's relevant to us is that he mentions something called the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah that we've been discussing. And he says that the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah is comprised of two forces. He says there's what he calls let's say like this. I call it Sammy and Lily, okay? Sammy and Lily. He calls it the male force and the female force. The male force, he calls he associates with a malach called Samuel, which I call Sammy. And the female force, which he associates with another malach of evil who's known as Lilith. And so there's the male force and the female force. And he says that the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah is comprised of a sort of a male aspect and a female aspect. And he explains that the lure for Avodah Zarah, that this Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah is a male aspect and a female aspect, meaning there's an intellectual aspect, and then there's sort of an emotional or behavioral, psychological aspect to the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah. Now, he doesn't elaborate on this point, but we are going to elaborate on this point, okay? The way I prepared it, I have 10 different ways of understanding how this works, and we can divide it into basically 6 approaches that are explain the lore of Avodah Zarah in a sort of intellectual way, and 4 approaches which explain the lore of Avodah Zarah in a more, it's hard to, the terminology here is sort of ambiguous, but you could call it emotional or behavioral or psychological in a more behavioral way as opposed to an intellectual way or a cognitive way. Okay, so let's go with we'll start with the 6 intellectual, let's say, justifications or ways of understanding what drove people towards Avodah Zarah. Anytime, okay, the first one is like this. The first one is the Rambam, because anytime you discuss the history of Avodah Zarah or the ideology of Avodah Zarah, the first source you're always going to start with is the Rambam in the beginning of Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Perek Aleph. Okay, the Rambam does not usually go into the history or the ideology behind different mitzvahs and averas that he talks about in his famous Yad. That's not what the Rambam does in the Yad HaChazaka. But in the case of Avodah Zarah, the Rambam gives us an introduction where he goes through the history of Avodah Zarah. Okay, the Rambam, Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Perek Aleph, he talks about how Avodah Zarah began with a mistake. It began with an honest mistake, and he says that it began in the time of Enosh, which Chazal seem to say this as well, and other sources also say that the Avodah Zarah began in the time of Enosh. And what happened was that man looked up to the sun, they looked outside, and they said, look, Hashem put the sun in a lofty place, all the way up there in the Shemayim. It's in an important place, it's in an important position. So that would suggest to us that just like Hashem put the sun or the moon or the celestial bodies in important positions in the world, and Hashem gave them honor, so it must be that Hashem wants us to also honor the sun and the moon and give them, look at them as important things. Okay, so the Rambam says that that's how Avodah Zarah started. It first started with a mistake that people thought, if Hashem is going to honor the sun and the moon and the celestial bodies, so Hashem wants us to also honor the sun and the moon and the celestial bodies. Right? So the first of the Avodah Zarah, according to the Rambam, they recognized Hashem and they understood Hashem, but they mistakenly believed that Hashem wants them to honor other entities, other parts of creation. And then, as the Rambam explains, it sort of devolved from there and went downhill from there. And they started building temples in honor of the sun and the moon. And then false prophets came and started saying, you should offer sacrifices in their honor. And then eventually what happened was that people just forgot about Hashem. And then because they were so focused on worshiping and honoring the sun and the moon, so they just ended up worshiping the sun and the moon and the celestial bodies just because of that. Okay, so that's how the Rambam made it. And in the end, they ended up forgetting about Hashem. Do I have any questions? The silence is sort of eerie.
Rabbi, do you think that you can explain to us why, like Catholicism, and in other words, would that fit into the category of Avodah Zarah?
Let's see how far we can get. Okay. So that the first way of understanding what drove people towards Avodah Zarah, according to the Rambam, was this mistaken belief. Someone's raising their hand.
Yeah, I just asked that, following what you're saying, why would have they? What benefits were they getting from it that they were so quick to forget Hashem? Because when you dive into Hashem, you get results, and when you dive into the sun, do you get results? Did they get results?
So that is what I would say the $1 million question. Okay, that is the $1 million question. Many people will tell you that it's a machlokas between the Rambam and others, the Ramban and the Drashos Haran maybe, whether people actually saw results from Avodah Zarah. There are people that will tell you that. I spoke to Rav Moshe Shapiro about this, and Rav Moshe Shapiro said that no, Avodah Zarah is completely useless and it doesn't give a person any results. Right? So then why would a person do it? What benefits do they see from it? You're asking a very good question. Be'ezus Hashem, when we get to the second part, when we talk about the more behavioral lure for Avodah Zarah, the more psychological lure, we're going to see that it does give the different elements of Avodah Zarah do give a person certain psychological satisfaction, and it could be that that's what drove them for Avodah Zarah, even if they didn't get exactly the results that they were trying to get to. But it's a very good question.
How come Rachel stole Lavan's idols? Because she thought that he would be able to know they left by looking at his idols. Obviously, he could find out information from his idols. Otherwise, why would she take them?
Right. So I actually discussed this in my book. Are the Trufim is not necessarily a type of Avodah Zarah. It could be it's a type of kishuf. It's more a type of witchcraft. That's first of all. And second of all, there are, I think it was one second. I remember looking through the different Mefarshim, and I noticed one second.
Well, there really no witchcraft. It's all Hashem. So Hashem is witchcraft too.
No. Meaning if witchcraft works, so the way it would work is that there's a legitimate, Hashem created the world with a legitimate way of doing things, and Hashem created the world with an illegitimate way of doing things. One second. And so if witchcraft would work, it would work because Hashem created that there's also an illegitimate way of making certain effects in the world. Okay, I can't find this passage right now, but okay. But the Trufim is also, someone else wrote something. How did they deteriorate to believing that they had to place the Avodah Zarah? Okay, well, we'll get to that. Okay, so we're talking about the intellectual basis for Avodah Zarah right now. Right? So the first one was the Rambam. That the Rambam understood that it simply came from a mistake. They thought that that's what Hashem wants them to do, so that's what they did, and then eventually they forgot about Hashem, and they were only worshiping Avodah Zarah. The Drashos Haran, Rabbeinu Nissim. One second, we could not explain actual process. In fact, the gods explain it. Today we know so much more because of science. Okay, that's a fair point. We'll get to that also. Okay, the Drashos Haran says that there was this belief that what happened was that Hashem created the world, and then they felt that after Hashem created the world, so he sort of retired. Okay, and when Hashem retired, he gave over the powers to affect creation to other forces. That's the Drashos Haran's approach. Okay. We find this actually in different Avodah Zarah cults. We find, like, let's say if you look at, like, if you're familiar with Greek mythology, so you have the Kronos or the Titans. Kronos is one of the Titans, and so here was, like, the earlier gods, and then Kronos somehow he retired or he got overthrown or whatever, and then the younger gods sort of took over. So the Drashos Haran is saying that was one of the intellectual basis for Avodah Zarah. They thought, they agreed Hashem created the world and Hashem has all this power, but afterwards he sort of retired. He took himself out and he left the world to run under the powers of other lower forces or whatever. And if we want to do something in the world, we have to appeal to those forces. We don't have to appeal to Hashem. Okay, that's the second intellectual basis for Avodah Zarah. That's the Drashos Haran. A third basis for Avodah Zarah is what the Ramchal talks about as dualism. So dualism, the Ramchal explains, means it's the belief in, let's say, two equally powerful gods. The Ramchal explains that this comes really from what scholars call a theodicy. The theodicy is the age-old question of, let's say, tzaddik v'raloi, or good and bad. Right? Why do bad things happen to good people, or good things happen to bad people? How can that be? How could there be good and bad in the same world? And how could there be one power that's making good and being bad? Is God good or is God bad? And so we explained this earlier. We said that, well, Hashem created the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer HaRa so that a person will have an equal opportunity to make his proper decisions, right? We said that's how you understand Bechira. But other people don't have this nuance, and other people looked at the question of good and bad as such a strong question that the only way they could resolve the question is by saying or positing that there must be two gods. And there's a God of good and a God of evil, and they're equally powerful, and they're sort of struggling with each other, and we have to try to support the God of good over the God of evil, but the God of evil has the same amount of powers as the God of good. And that's a dualism. So that's one of the intellectual bases for Avodah Zarah. The Ramchal says that stems from this theodicy, this inability to reconcile the contradiction of good and evil. The most famous dualist religion is Zoroastrianism, which was the popular religion in Persia in the time of the Gemara. So a lot of when the Gemara talks about a magi, so or amgushi in the lashon of the Gemara, so it's usually talking about a Persian who's Zoroastrian, and the Gemara actually talks about the two gods, Hormuz and Ahiraman or something like that. That the Zoroastrians believe there's a God of good and a God of evil, and they're trying to support the God of good in his fight against the God of evil. But they're two independent and two equal forces that are fighting with each other. That's the Zoroastrian approach. Christianity, to some extent, people consider dualist, different sects of Christianity that believe that the Satan or the Satan or the devil has equal power with Hashem. So some people might consider different types of Christianity to also be dualist. And the idea of dualism, the lure for this idea of dualism comes from the inability to reconcile the theodicy. So that's the third intellectual basis for Avodah Zarah. The fourth intellectual basis for Avodah Zarah, and the truth is that it could be that this is not necessarily intellectual, this might be more psychological or behavioral, but I put it in the list of intellectual, is that a person understands Hashem, he knows what Hashem wants from him, and he understands that Hashem is all-powerful, and he doesn't really believe that there's any other forces in the world, but he wants to make Hashem angry. He has something in his brain that says he wants to make Hashem angry. The Ramchal says that if you look through Sefer Malachim, whenever Jews were the ones that were being Avodah Zarah, he says that Jews that were worshiping Avodah Zarah were usually following this approach. They were usually just trying to make Hashem angry. We don't understand what the Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah was, because we don't have it nowadays. But one of the ways of understanding it was they had some sort of drive to make Hashem angry. I wrote very nicely about this in the introduction to my book. I brought from Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. He talks about this. Rav Chaim, I wrote I'll read you what I wrote. It says, Rav Chaim Shmulevitz offers a similar glimpse into the human condition during the time that the idolatrous inclination reigned free. He suggests that during those times, man had a certain desire to anger God and derived enjoyment from adding to his anger. Under such circumstances, man's intellectual knowledge and recognition of God were irrelevant in preventing him from worshiping idols. In other words, it was not man's lack of recognition of God that brought him to worship other forces. Rather, man was motivated to worship idols precisely because he was well aware that God existed and he wished to anger God. So Rav Chaim Shmulevitz gave a mashal about this. He says, this is similar to a child who wishes to rebel against his parents. What drives him is not that he fails to recognize that he has parents, far from it. His rebellious actions are precisely because he wants to make his parents angry. Only once the idolatrous inclination disappeared could rational thought become an effective means of dissuading one from engaging in idolatry. That's what Rav Chaim Shmulevitz says. So there's this idea of wanting to make Hashem angry.
I just want to say that it sounds crazy, but it actually makes sense what you're saying when you read Sefer Malachim. I mean, that's one of the Sfarim that made me a little bit frustrated because I just couldn't get it. Why? And the new king and Avodah Zarah and Hashem got angry with the people and he punished them, and another king, and this goes on, and I'm like, well, what am I supposed to learn from this Sefer? So what you're saying, even though it sounds crazy, but it makes sense because this was the pattern. This was what was happening.
Yeah. There's the Gemara talks about one of the kings. It says that one of the kings of Yehuda, he committed a form of incest in addition to his Avodah Zarah that he did, And then it says that the next king said that the previous king, when he did all these averas, so he didn't know how to make Hashem angry. But I'm going to make Hashem really angry. And it says that he did an even worse form of incest. So it's like you see from that Gemara that like the drive was they're trying to make Hashem angry. That was one of the things that was motivating them. So Ramchal says that this specific type of intellectual basis for Avodah Zarah that was more prevalent amongst Jews that were worshiping Avodah Zarah as opposed to amongst Goyim that were worshiping Avodah Zarah. Right, so that's number 4. Number 5 is a very interesting point. This is the Ramban and the Rashba and a lot of other Rishonim bring this down also. It says, Chazal tell us in Parshas Hazinu, it says that B'hanchel Aliyah in Goyim, when Hashem...
I'm sorry, can I ask you a question?
You just did.
Yeah, no, I know, but I want to ask you like a real question. The question is, what purpose would it serve to get God angry? Like, why are they doing it just after to get God angry?
Oh, so that's why I was thinking that maybe this isn't really such an intellectual basis for Avodah Zarah. Maybe this is more of a psychological or an emotional thing. They wanted to make him angry. You're right. It doesn't make any sense from an intellectual perspective. What was it? Stemming in part from a desire to get more direct attention from Hashem? I hear that's an interesting point.
But that's not intellectual.
That's you. Who's Mrs. Sussman? I don't know who that is. Okay, but yeah, that's not necessarily intellectual. That's more of a behavioral or psychological. They're trying to get some sort of satisfaction. So if they're not going to get positive attention, at least they'll get negative attention. Yeah, that could be. Okay, so in Parshas Hazinu, it says that when Hashem divided up the nations, when Hashem divided all of humanity into the different nations of the world, Hashem set up the borders of the nations according to the number of the children of Israel. Okay, so what does it mean, the number of the children of Israel? There's a lot of different approaches, but the consensus approach in the Midrashim is that it's referring to the 70 people, the 70 members of Yaakov Avinu's family that came down to Mitzrayim. Yaakov Avinu's family that came down to Mitzrayim was 70 people. So when Hashem divided the world, divided humanity into different nations, Hashem divided them according to the number of Jews that came down to Mitzrayim, which is 70. So Hashem created 70 nations. Okay? L'mispar b'nei Yisrael. So there are midrashim that say that when Hashem divided the world into 70 nations, so he took the period of Eliezer says this. It says that Hashem took 70 different angels in the Shemayim, and he put each of those angels in charge of a different nation. So each nation is under the control of one of 70 angels. And when Hashem sends hashpa, when Hashem is mashpia, Hashem influences those different nations, so Hashem does not influence them directly. Hashem does it through the medium of these angels. So Hashem influences them through the angels. And the Ramban, in a few places in Chumash, speaks about this idea that, but when it comes to Bnei Yisrael, right? What's like right? And then it says that Klal Yisrael is Yaakov Chevel Nachalasei. When it comes to Klal Yisrael, so Klal Yisrael is Hashem is influenced directly from Hashem. The Ramban says that all other lands are influenced through these sarim, these divine or these heavenly ministers, call it. But when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, it's mushpat directly from Hashem, and that's why Hashgacha Pratis, you see it much clearer in Eretz Yisrael. You don't see it in other lands. So the Ramban speaks about this in Parshas Kedoshim. That's why Eretz Yisrael is more sensitive to different averas, and it will kick people out because it's a more pure place, etc. Right? So there's this concept that when Hashem is mashpia on other nations, so he's mashpia on them through their angel. But when it comes to being mashpia on Klal Yisrael, Hashem is mashpia on Klal Yisrael directly. So the Ramban and the Rashba, the Ramban is in Parshas Yisro by the 10 Commandments. So the Ramban says that one of the ways that people did Avodah Zarah, or this is more of a non-Jewish type of Avodah Zarah, one of the ways that the Goyim would do Avodah Zarah was that instead of worshiping Hashem, they would worship their particular angel. One second, I see a question over here. Didn't they get what they wanted when Hashem told them to build a teva? Okay, fine. So the Ramban says that one of the types of Avodah Zarah that they were doing was that they were worshiping their sar, their angelic representative or their angelic minister, instead of worshiping Hashem. Now, according to Chazal and according to what we're saying, these sarim do exist. Hashem is mashpia on these nations through these sarim. So in a way, it sort of makes sense that you might want to worship the sar, because that's the person that the force that you're getting your hashpah directly from. You don't recognize that it comes from the sar, from Hashem. You're not going to go up too many steps. You just look at who's affecting you directly. You don't look at the CEO of the company. You look at like your boss. Right? So if you want to raise, you don't go to the CEO. You go to your personal boss. Right? So that was one of the other. This is what we're calling the fifth basis for Avodah Zarah. The intellectual basis is that they're appealing to what was the direct cause of their hashpah instead of the ultimate cause of the hashpah. Now the problem is that the truth is that Hashem never gave these angels any ability to make decisions, right? So they're wrong. This is the intellectual basis for it, but they're wrong, because the sar, or the malach that's in charge of the nation, is just a tool, like we said before. The tool doesn't have any ability to make its own decisions. So you can't appeal to the tool and ask the tool for favors. You ask a hammer, hammer, can you do me a favor and bang that nail? It doesn't work like that. The hammer can't make its own decisions. So that's the intellectual basis, but it's still wrong. That's number 5 in the intellectual basis. And number 6 it's similar to number 1 and similar to this one. It's that people thought that Hashem is too lofty for them to appeal directly to them. And they thought that Hashem is all the way up in the heavens. Hashem is infinite. Hashem is so great. Hashem is so this, so that. Has so much kach. I can't relate to him. He's way above me. He's just too much. Right? Ram al kol goyim Hashem al hashamayim kavayday. Hashem is Ram. He's above. He's higher than all nations. Al hashamayim kavayday. His honor deserves to be up in the heavens. We can't relate to him. So there's no way that we can worship him, because he's just way too above us. Right? So the Alshich, and I saw Rav Wolbe also brings this down. They understand that this pasuk that I just said, Ram al kol goyim Hashem al shemayim kavayday, which we say in Hallel, is sort of a polemic, is part of a polemic or discussion about Avodah Zarah. The goyim will say, Ram al kol goyim Hashem al shemayim kavayday. But what's the answer? The answer is, Mik Hashem Elokeinu hamagbi lo shaves hamashpili lirais b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. The answer is that yes, Hashem is all powerful and is so great and everything. But one of the godless of Hashem, one of the greatnesses of Hashem is that Hashem lowers himself kibiyachol so that we can relate to him. He brings himself down kibiyachol so that hamashpili lirais b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. Mashpil is like he comes down lirais b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, to see what's happening in the world. Hashem is not too much above the world that you can't relate to him and you can't ask him for anything. Hashem, part of his godless is that he brings himself down so that you could relate to him. And the truth is that people think, according to this approach of Avodah Zarah, so what they were thinking is that if Hashem is so great, so the only way to get to him, or to pray to him, or to ask anything from him, is through some sort of an intermediary. To get an emtsoi, an intermediary. So I'm not going to worship Hashem. I'm going to worship the sun and ask the sun, Mr. Sun, can you tell Hashem that I need extra food this year? Right? You're going to go through an intermediary. But the truth is that if you really believe that Hashem is so great and so infinite, so then how is going to the sun going to help you? if you can't reach Hashem because Hashem is so infinite, so how's the sun going to help you? Is the sun going to reach Hashem? If Hashem is infinite and the sun is finite, it's just like Hashem is way above you, Hashem is going to be way above the sun. So the logic also doesn't really work. They thought that you can use an intermediary to get to something infinite, but they can't use themselves to get to something infinite, which doesn't make any sense. It's like once it's infinite, neither you nor the intermediary can reach it. So how could you reach Hashem? It must be that Hashem, as we say, kibiyachol, so to speak, lowers himself down so that people can relate to him. This is a big philosophical question that people talk about: the immanence of God versus the transcendence of God. Those are the terms that they use in this discussion. So those are the 6 intellectual basis for. So why does Hashem need angels to administer? It's a beautiful question. And the answer is, the answer is, Hashem does not need angels to administer. He doesn't need angels to administer. The truth is, he does not need angels to administer. He doesn't need angels to administer. But Lamaisa, he does use them. He uses them. One of the reasons people say is because the more tools or the more ministers or the more angels that Hashem has at his disposal, so the more covet he's going to get from creation. A king who has 10 servants on call is not the same as a king who has 100 servants on call. Okay. So then you can ask, but why does he need extra covet or extra honor? Okay, that's getting into a different discussion.
Again, it's also a way of giving us more reward because it's a way to confuse humanity. So when there's intermediaries, it could lead a person, again, it's strengthening our bechira.
That's also true. Yeah, that's definitely true as well. So, okay, so we just said basically 6 different intellectual bases for why a person would do Avodah Zarah or what the lure of Avodah Zarah was. I could go over them again very briefly, or we could just move on to the behavioral ones because we're running out of time. What do you guys say? Okay, let's just move on. Fine. So now we have 4 different understandings for the lure or the basis of Avodah Zarah that are more like on an emotional or psychological behavioral level. One point is the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim in his Guide to the Perplexed. So the Rambam talks about how the Avodah Zarah would play on people's fears. They would play on people's fears, manipulate their emotions, and sort of try to guilt them into worshiping Avodah Zarah. So even if on an intellectual basis you understand that there's only one Hashem and there's no basis for worshiping Avodah Zarah whatsoever, and there's nothing to it, but on an emotional level, you might be scared into worshiping Avodah Zarah. You might be guilted into doing it. They would manipulate people's emotions into doing it. They would tell people. The Rambam brings down that the cult of Molech, right? So Molech was that a person would take his child and pass his child through a fire. I have a whole discussion whether it means that they would kill the child or they would just bring it through a fire, or would it matter whether they killed it or just brought it through the fire, walk it through a fire. That's a whole discussion, exactly what Molech was, which I talk about in my book. And the book is, part of it is an encyclopedia of different types of Avodah Zarahs that come up in Tanakh. So in the encyclopedia section, I talk about exactly what Molech was. But the point is that the Rambam says that the priests of Molech would tell people that, if you want your children to live, so you have to take at least one of your sons and give them over to the Molech, and then all of your children will live. They won't die, let's say, in your lifetime, right? Or the Rambam says that they'll tell people, if you don't want to have any financial trouble, so you have to worship the Molech, right? So then if their child dies or is very sick, right? So they're gonna feel guilted into worshiping Molech, not because it makes sense on any intellectual level, but because everyone says that you got to worship the Molech in order for your kids to live, and I didn't do it. And am I a not responsible parent because I'm not worshiping Molech? They're gonna feel guilty, and it's gonna play on their fears. And they're gonna be forced into doing it on that level, or they're gonna have some sort of financial strain, and people are gonna tell them, well, you really deserve it because you didn't worship Molech. So if you want to get out of any financial difficulties, you got to worship Molech. They would sort of play with people's emotions and their fears and their guilt in that sort of way. It's an interesting idea that Rav Hirsch points out. Actually wrote an essay about this not long ago, that there's two different words for priests in Lashon HaKodesh. There's a Kohen, which is a priest, but it's a sort of generic term for priest. A Kohen could be like a Kohen in the Beis HaMikdash, which is a legitimate way of serving Hashem. Or a Kohen could be like Potiphar, it's called a Kohen On, right? Or Yisra, a Kohen Midyan, is a priest of Avodah Zarah. A Kohen can be a good Kohen or a bad Kohen. But there's another term that we find, a Komer. A Komer means a priest, but it specifically means a priest of Avodah Zarah. Okay, so who were these priests and why were they so influential? We'll leave that for a different time. But there's Kohen versus Komer. Kohen is a general term, and Komer is a specific term for a priest of Avodah Zarah. So Rav Hirsch says, where does the word Komer come from? So he says, Rav Hirsch in Parshas Miketz, he says that the word Komer comes from the pasuk by Yosef, when Yosef was about to, when Yosef was pretending, was dealing harshly with his brothers, and he had to cry, and he was about to reveal himself. It says, Ki nichmu rachamo v'lachiv. His mercy was aroused over his brothers. Nichmuru rachamo v'lachiv. So Rav Hirsch says that the word komer, the shorish of the word komer is kaf mem reish, is related to this word nichmuru rachamo, which is it's an overpowering emotional feeling. So Rav Hirsch says that's how the priests of Avodah Zarah used to work. What they would do is they would try to get you to have an emotional, overpowering emotional feeling, and that's what they would push you to do Avodah Zarah. As opposed to a Kohen, which is a generic term, which does not necessarily entail manipulating a person's emotions in order to do Avodah Hashem. That's Rav Hirsch on Komer versus Kohen. So that's the first way of understanding the behavioral or emotional, psychological way or basis or lure for Avodah Zarah. The second way of understanding this is that a person has a sort of psychological satisfaction from being self-reliant. When a person feels that he's in charge, so that gives them a certain satisfaction. Oh, I'm in charge. It gives them a certain psychological, it fills a certain psychological drive to feel like he's in charge. I'm in charge. I control my own destiny. I can do what I want. I'm self-reliant. I'm in charge. So if you compare Avodah Zarah to, let's say, Judaism, so Avodah Zarah is much more, it makes you feel like you're in charge much more. Right? In Avodah Zarah, there's a whole pantheon of gods. There's a whole set of gods. And depending on what I feel like, what I want today, so I'll decide which god I want to worship. If I'm looking for love, I'll worship Aphrodite. If I'm looking for good weather, so I'll worship Zeus. If I'm looking for success in war, so I'll worship Mars. Right? Okay, I just mixed up the Greek and the Roman pantheons, but you get the point. The point is, whatever I feel like worshiping, I can decide. I can decide what I'm going to worship today. Right? And there's different small things like that. Avodah Zarah is more of a sort of subjective religious experience as opposed to an objective religious experience. It's more subjective. It's more personalized. It's more, I can sort of choose how I want to do things. I wrote a whole thing over here. What's a chas v'shalom? Someone wrote chas v'shalom. I'm not sure what that's referring to. Okay. Anyways, the point is
I wrote chas v'shalom because somebody wrote there that when they send in money to get a bracha so your family won't get COVID-19. So no, it's nothing to do with, I mean, it's, of course, we can go directly to Hashem and we don't have to do that, but to give a tzedakah is a Torah-based way of moving, of getting away from a bad decree. So it's got nothing to do with Avodah Zarah.
No, for sure. No, so, yeah. I mean, the Gemara talks about it. It's a school. The problem is that some people take it too far sometimes, and they tend to think that these type of things have an independent reality. That it's just like you do this skula, you do this action, and then it automatically will bring about a certain result. So that is not quite Avodah Zarah, but it's sort of similar to Avodah Zarah in a lot of different ways, and. We don't. That's not what we believe. We believe that maybe Hashem created a reality that if you do good, so Hashem will. If you give tzedakah, so Hashem will reward you with this. But it's still coming from Hashem. It's not coming from the act of giving tzedakah. right? That's sometimes people forget that, but that's definitely an issue. So this idea of a subjective religious experience that a person feels like he's in control, it's a self-reliance. So that's another one of the psychological or behavioral drives for Avodah Zarah. People want to feel like they can do whatever they're in control of their own destiny. They're in control of what's going to happen to themselves, as opposed to if there's only one God. So you don't really have much leeway. You're only worshiping one God. It's the same. You're worshiping the same God day in, day out, and you're asking Him for everything you need. You have 19 brachas in Shemona Esrei. You're asking the same God for health, and you're asking the same God for parnasa, and you're asking the same God for wisdom. Well, if you were in the Babylonian pantheons, you would have one God for wisdom, whose name was Nevo, by the way, and you have one God for health, whose name was Reshef. There's different things that would come up. I also wrote over here that I would talk about Bamos at this point, because Bamos is a private altars, right? We usually were familiar with the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan, which were centralized places of worshiping. That's where you brought korbanos. There were some points in Jewish history when Bamos were mutter. Private altars, it was mutter, it was permitted to bring a korban on a private altar. Right? You can set up your altar, you can set up your mizbeach wherever you want, you bring your korban there. With certain types of korbanos at certain points in history, it was mutter to bring on a bama. Now, the attraction of a bama was that you can do whatever, you have more leeway. You don't have to have necessarily a kohen. You don't have to dress in big day kahuna. You can dress however you want. It's more, there's not that's more leeway. You're more in control. You're more in charge of what you're doing and how you're worshiping. That's the idea of bamas. Now the problem is that once they came to Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash was built, bamas were forbidden forever. Right? There's no such thing as a heter of bamas. Yet we find throughout the Sefer Malachim that people continued worshiping on bamas, right? And we find the Sefer Malachim will give accolades to different kings for destroying bamas, and will criticize different kings for not destroying bamas, right? Because bamas are related to Avodah Zarah. It's not technically Avodah Zarah, but it's related to Avodah Zarah in this way that a bama, worshiping at a bama, gives a person this self-satisfaction that he's in charge. He could choose how he's going to worship, where, when, different things. So that's it's similar to Avodah Zarah. And once you start letting people make their own decisions in that way, so it's leading down the slippery slope towards Avodah Zarah. That's okay. So that's our second way of understanding the behavioral or psychological aspect of Avodah Zarah. The third way, I heard this from Rav Moshe Shapiro. There's also a Maral that says a similar idea, that one of the problems, a sort of psychological idea, is that man tends to be uncomfortable with his own shortcomings. Man looks at his own failures and his inability to succeed in whatever he wants to do, and he's uncomfortable with that. It makes a sort of anxiety or tension with himself. So Rav Moshe Shapiro says that one of the ways of alleviating that sort of anxiety or that sort of tension is that a person will connect himself to something higher than himself and say, even if I'm not successful, but if I can connect to somebody who is successful or something that is more powerful than me, so then I can have the power to do something like that. I can have more power than I actually do have. That's one way of alleviating this tension. Another way of alleviating this tension is you simply embrace who you are. You say, I'm small, I don't have all kinds of abilities, I don't have all sorts of powers, but you know what? Small things also have all kinds of major powers, and that's how they cope with it. They're going to identify with small things and worship small things and insignificant things and put that on a high pedestal, because they'll say, for example, a fly, okay? A fly is a very lowly creature, tiny, tiny little creature. All it does is fly around, has a very short lifespan, doesn't really do much, right? But you turn the fly into a god, okay? The Lord of the Flies, right? Baal Zavuv, the Lord of the Flies. Baal Zavuv is the name of Avodah Zarah that people used to worship. It's in the beginning of Sefer Malachim base. It was an actual Avodah Zarah, the Baal Zavuv. They worship the fly. Why do they worship a fly? because a fly is a lowly creature. And if I'm uncomfortable with my own lowliness, so my way of alleviating that tension or that uncomfortableness is by saying that, no, small things are also important. I'm lifting something that's very small into something, and making it into a big deal, much bigger than it is. Right? So that's the Baal Zavuv. That's how I cope with my own shortcomings, by taking something small and making it into a bigger deal than it is. Baal Pa'or, which is basically a way of worshiping, going to the bathroom, is another way of doing that, right? A person, going to the bathroom is not one of the most, honorable or laudable activities that a person does, but that's, if a person is uncomfortable with that type of lowliness or limitation of man, they'll say, no, it's not that going to the bathroom is a low thing. No, going to the bathroom, that is my God. That is my way of worshiping. It's just a psychological trick to deal with your own issues. It doesn't have any real basis to it. But that's the idea of Baal Pa'or. So I heard this idea from Moshe Shapiro, but the truth is that it's really coming from a Maral in Gur Aryeh, when the Maral talks about in Parshas Vayera, when it says that when the three angels came to visit Avram Avinu, so he first had them wash their feet because he used to worship the dust on their feet. So Maral talks about who in their right mind would worship the dust on their feet. That doesn't make any sense. Why would you worship dust? What's the idea of worshiping dust? So the Maral sort of says this idea that they're worshiping dust to show that, even something small is really important. And that's their way of trying to say that even though they have their own shortcomings, they're really still important. It's a sort of psychological need. Okay, that's the third psychological or behavioral approach. And the fourth one is, the Gemara says, Loi avdu Yisrael avodah zarah ela lahatal lahem arayos. The fourth approach is that Avodah Zarah is just a means of doing fulfilling other desires, right? And people who are involved in the advertising industry, they know that sex sells. Right? If you want to get people interested, you want to catch people's attention, so you can tell them, you can bring up certain types of topics, and all of a sudden everyone's listening, right? All of a sudden everyone's listening. The Chassam Sofer and the Vilna Gaon both bring down that there's a Kabbalah from the Vilna Gaon and from the Chassam Sofer, that every type of Avodah Zarah, every form of worshiping Avodah Zarah also had some aspect of Gilui Arayos involved as well. So that was the way they would get people. It wasn't an intellectual thing. It wasn't necessarily a psychological thing. It was more a base behavioral thing. So if you want to join a cult that justifies certain acts that are not necessarily permitted in polite company, so you join this Avodah Zarah cult, and if you join this cult, then this type of act is permitted. You can do this. We'll let you do that. Right? And that's one of the ways they were able to recruit people. So those are the four psychological or behavioral ways of doing Avodah Zarah, of drives for Avodah Zarah. I think we are running late. I do have a set of questions that I think it was Mrs. Frank sent me that people wanted answered, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that have some questions over here. So how do you guys want to do this? Or we want to stop over here because it's like past the time?
Let's have some questions, right, Yaffa?
Okay, so I'll just go through some of the questions you guys sent me already. So one question was, how did idol worship differ in different periods of history? So if you look in my book, I talk about how some points in history, Avodah Zarah was more a deviant way of worshiping Hashem, and at some points in history, Avodah Zarah was actually worshiping foreign gods that, let's say, came from outside of Eretz Yisrael, or things that were influenced from the Goyim, that they worshiped. They had certain things that they worshipped. So Avodah Zarah entailed doing that. I also talk about in my book how a lot of times we find in Tanakh it says everyone worshipped Avodah Zarah. So the Mepharshim explain that that's somewhat exaggerated at certain points, that it's not necessarily everyone, but maybe because people didn't protest of the Avodah Zarah, so they're guilty as well. So there's different ways of understanding what was happening. He wrote, one of the questions was, what was the golden calf during the days of Moses? Why did the Israelites worship the calf? So again, there's different ways of understanding what the Egel HaZahab was. I have a chapter about that in my book. One of the classical ways of understanding is that it's this intermediary thing. We spoke about the concept of using an intermediary to appeal to Hashem. Another way of understanding it was that it was a way of serving Hashem in a sort of deviant fashion. A lot of Mefarshim, Rashi goes with this approach, seemingly say that it really Klal Yisrael didn't worship the Egel Azav, it was really only the Erev Rav. It could be that Klal Yisrael started worshiping it afterwards once the train got out of the station, so Klal Yisrael also joined in, but it started off with just the Erev Rav. It says,
what about Rabbi, what about the Hindu religion? Is that considered Avodah Zarah today?
1 second. One of the questions was, what was Aaron's role in the affair? So I wanted to say that Aaron, we speak about what was Aaron HaKohen's role in the Egel Azav. So one approach is that Aaron HaKohen only really participated with them, or he only was Mishatef Pula because he wanted to stall for time, and he was hoping that by the time they actually end up doing something, Moshe Rabbeinu will already be back. But what happened was that the Erev Rav sorcerers were Egyptian sorcerers. They were able to do things very quickly with their magic powers or whatever, and they brought the Egel too fast before Moshe Rabbeinu had a chance to come back. Another approach was that Aaron HaKohen was only pretending to join in the Egel Azav cult so that he could weed out and figure out who's really loyal to Hashem and who's really loyal to Avodah Zarah, and they'll be able to kick out the different people from the Jewish nation the riffraff. And riffraff, some people say that the word riffraff is actually the etymology of riffraff comes from Erev Rav. I'm not sure if that's really true, but that's an interesting point. You wrote, what were the two calves that were set up at the two temples in northern kingdom of Israel? Right, so after Shlomo Melech died, so the united kingdom of Klal Yisrael split into the northern kingdom of Yisrael and the southern kingdom of Yehuda. So the first king of the northern kingdom of Yisrael, his name was Yeravam. So Yeravam ben Nevat, he set up two golden calves, one in Dan and one in Beis El. So what was driving Yeravam ben Nevat to do that? So some people say that it was connected to the golden calf, and maybe he was influenced by Egyptian Avodah Zarah. We know that Egyptians used to worship an ox or a bull. It was called the Apis bull. It was different, the Osiris bull. So we also know that Yeravam ben Nevat spent some time in Egypt when he was running away from Shlomo Melech. So there are some sort of Egyptian influences, but the way that most Mefarshim understand it is that Yeravam ben Nevat did this for political reasons. He didn't want Klal Yisrael to go to Yerushalayim to be Oila Regel on the Yamim Tovim and see all the honor that's given to the king of Yehuda in the Beis HaMikdash. So for political reasons, he sort of set up these alternate places of worship where he put these golden calves so that people would worship over there. Okay, you wrote, what was the battle?
Rabbi Klein, I think that we should take now questions of the people who are on the share and leave the questions that were sent to you prior to the class, because if not, we're not going to have time. So let's put those questions aside. We won't relate to them anymore. And now I see that Jackie asked a very good question, and then whoever else has a question on what you taught.
Okay, so what is Avodah Zarah today in our daily lives? And somebody else asked, what about Hinduism and Buddhism? So this is a very complicated topic about each one, and I'm not going to give a straight answer about each one. But let's say when it comes to Christianity, so there's at least 30,000 different sects of Christianity. So when you ask, is Christianity Avodah Zarah? So you have to examine what are the beliefs and theologies and behaviors of each one of those different sects of Christianity. Was that no exclamation point in our daily lives? We're not Hindu. What does that mean? I'm not sure.
Rabbi Klein is answering Julie's question first. He hasn't started answering your question yet, Jackie.
So let's say if you talk about, let's say, Christianity, so different types of Christianity are more tending towards Avodah Zarah and different types are less towards Avodah Zarah. Like, depending on how you understand the concept of the Trinity, right? Which is, there's one God, and then there's also his Son, and then there's also a Holy Ghost, and somehow you have these three forces which are different, but they're equal somehow, which I don't understand how it makes sense. But depending on how they understand it might make sense, then it may or may not be Avodah Zarah. Then there's a question of, do they worship icons? Different sects of Christianity worship icons, and different ones don't worship icons. So like, Christianity is a complicated thing. Somebody, Mina has to go. Okay, bye, Mina.
Can I
What-
ask a question?
What?
Can I ask a question?
One second.
You have
Islam, most Rishonim say that Islam is not considered Avodah Zarah because they're worshiping only one Hashem. Even the Rambam talks about different practices that Muslims do that seem like Avodah Zarah, and the Rambam says that it's not really Avodah Zarah, even though it might have idolatrous origins, like throwing rocks throwing rocks by the Kaaba and throwing rocks at the Sultan, and different things like that. The consensus seems to be that Islam is not considered Avodah Zarah, although there are Gaonim that say that Islam is Avodah Zarah. Hinduism is, I wrote a whole thing, I can send you a link if you want. I wrote a whole book review about a book that wanted to argue that Hinduism is not considered Avodah Zarah. It's simple to say such a thing. It's more complicated than that. But obviously, one of the big ramifications of the question of Hinduism, besides the obvious question of Yain Nesach, would be about the shaitels that come from Hindu temples. Would that be considered Avodah Zarah contraband or not? Yeah, I just sent you a link to. Oh, I didn't send it to you. I have to send it to everyone. I'm sending you a link to a book review that I wrote about a book that says that Hinduism is not Avodah Zarah, and my problems with what he says in that book. Yes, what's your question, ma'am?
1 minute. Jackie asked a question before her that you were not able, I don't know if you skipped it. Before, yeah.
Oh, yeah. What is Avodah Zarah today in our daily lives? So, I mean, again, we don't really have a Yetzer HaRa for Avodah Zarah, so we don't have necessarily things that would technically be considered Avodah Zarah, but we have things that are similar to Avodah Zarah, right? The Gemara says that when a person gets angry and he let's say he breaks things in his anger, so that's kol shever kalim bekaisai kiu ovid Avodah Zarah. If a person gets angry and he breaks things out of his anger, so that's like he's ovid Avodah Zarah. So what does that mean? So that sort of relates to one of the ideas that we're talking about, that the Avodah Zarah, one of the hallmarks or one of the drives of Avodah Zarah is that a person wants to feel like he's in control. So most of the time, anger comes from a person seeing that there's something that's beyond him that he can't control, and he gets frustrated by that, and that causes anger. Right? So I'm not saying that when a person becomes angry, it is Avodah Zarah, but it's a first cousin of Avodah Zarah. It's related to Avodah Zarah in certain ways. And there's a lot of different things. If the Gemara says that if a person makes a nether and he doesn't fulfill the nether, it's like he did Avodah Zarah. And if a person makes a nether and he does fulfill the nether, it's like he made a bama, right? Because he's sort of making his own personalized religion. And a nether is like he's making a prohibition that the Torah doesn't say, but he's making his own personalized thing. So that's like sort of like like we spoke about, like bamas. Like it makes the person feel like they're in control. There's a lot of other things that the Chazal say, like this is similar to Avodah Zarah, right? So we don't really actually have 100% Avodah Zarah. We have things that are similar. Does that answer your question, Mrs. Lowenstein? I can't hear her. Let's assume that it does.
Jackie, she wrote you.
Oh, we want to be sure we're not worshiping Avodah Zarah ourselves. Okay. There's different people. There was this. I actually have this sefer over here. Where is it? I was working through this sefer recently. It's called Knesset L'Shem Shamayim. Okay. It was written by Menashe Siton, who was a Rav in Aleppo about 100 years ago. And he has this whole sefer talking about this practice that Jewish women had in Damascus, where they would end up giving korbanos to shadim in order to get a refuah shlema for different people in their families. It's like that. He wrote this whole sefer to say that that's considered Avodah Zarah, and he got a lot of good aschamas. Now, I don't think that things that are that extreme are really a problem nowadays. But that's something that was an issue even in more recent times. There are people that will tell you that the way that some people relate to skulas and the way that some people relate to praying at kvarim may be Avodah Zarah or similar to Avodah Zarah. You have to be very careful about what you're doing there, right? If you take a poll of people that go to Miran and Lag BaOmer, so you can ask them, what are you doing here? And you'll ask 100 people, you'll get 100 different answers. And some of them might be inclined toward, might be similar to Avodah Zarah, and some of them, might be completely kosher. Is wearing a fancy, glamorous wig a form of Avodah Zarah? What is that? Why would it be a form of Avodah Zarah? I mean, look, Rav Ovadia Yosef said that wearing a sheitel is Gili Arayas, Avodah Zarah, and Shfichas Damim. Okay. Is Gili Arayas for obvious reasons, because it attracts attention. It says Avodah Zarah because all, let's say a lot, or if not all, of the human hair that they use for making wigs comes from the temples in India. So it's probably going to be considered takuvas Avodah Zarah. I went through this topic a lot. I tried to find a lot of different heterim, but the pashtus is that it's probably going to be takruvas Avodah Zarah. So it's not an act of Avodah Zarah, but it's deriving benefit from Avodah Zarah, which is aser. And then he says it's shfichas damim because you're wasting money for buying a sheitel. So he says that it's gilei rayas, Avodah Zarah, and shfichas damim. Here, I just pulled up. I wrote a list of different things on my computer. Different things that Chazal say is tantamount to doing Avodah Zarah. So somebody asked, so do we have Avodah Zarah nowadays? So I said, we don't have Avodah Zarah per se. We have things that are similar to Avodah Zarah. So like Gemara Bracha says, when a person davens when he's drunk, so that's like he's doing Avodah Zarah. It says when a person tears his clothing in anger, or he breaks things in anger, so that's like Avodah Zarah. That's Gemara in Shabbos, like I mentioned before. It says if a person is mevaza hamoyadim, a person disgraces the Yomim Tovim, so that's like his worshiping of Avodah Zarah. It says if a person...
What was the first one? If a person davens what?
Davens when he's drunk.
Ah, okay. Sorry.
There's a whole understanding over here.
If a person davens with what?
When he's drunk. Drunk, intoxicated, inebriated. Yeah. It says if a person, Gemara Bava Basra, if a person evades giving tzedakah, so that's like his Oived of Avodah Zarah. It says if a person lives outside Eretz Yisrael, it's like his Oived of Avodah Zarah. That's Gemara Ksubis. It says if a person has gaiva, it's like his Oived of Avodah Zarah.
Slow down. What was that one? The person what?
If a person avoids giving tzedakah, evades giving tzedakah, if a person lives outside Eretz Yisrael, if a person is haughty, is gaiva, right? If a person doesn't keep to his word,
Doesn't keep his word?
Doesn't keep his word. If a person gives honor to Rishonim, so that's also like his Oived of Avodah Zarah. If a person,
to what?
If he honors wicked people, if he teaches a wicked student, right? If he goes to a non-Jewish court, if he steals, there's a lot of different things that we find in Chazal and in other commentaries, that we say that if a person does this, it's like he's Oived of Avodah Zarah. So I wrote a whole list. I hope to go through it and then try to explain some of them one by one in the volume 2 of my work.
Well, I guess that from this we can conclude that on Yom Kippur, when we clap on the chait that we did Avodah Zarah, we can feel more comfortable because we probably, chas v'chalila, with all the stuff that you just enumerated, it could be that sometimes we could get close to that Easter. So, yeah.
Putting a key L, what does that mean? Someone wrote, putting a key L?
A key. I don't know, Edie, what did you mean?
Oh, she's referring to Schlissel Challah.
No, yeah, when they put a key in the challah.
Uh-huh.
Put, Parnasa. That's not Avodah Zarah.
I don't know if it's Avodah Zarah. It could be. It's like I would say it's a silly thing, and it doesn't really have any serious sources. And there are people that say that it has sources in the Christians used to put the what's it called, a cross on a bun or something. I don't know where this comes from exactly, but it's I don't know if it's. I wouldn't say it's Avodah Zarah. I wouldn't recommend doing it either though.
Which thing is that?
Go
What?
ahead. I don't know if someone else wants to talk. It's okay. Someone told me kissing the Torah as it goes around is Avodah Zarah.
Check out the words. What was it, Edie? What did you say?
Someone who's pretty knowledgeable that kissing the Torah as it goes around the room on Shabbat is Avodah Zarah.
Taking the Torah around the room on Shabbat? Is
Kissing.
Kissing. Oh.
So that's actually a very common thing that people say that cynical people like to say. So the first person that I found that addresses this is Rav Menashe ben Yisrael. Have you heard of Menashe ben Israel? He was a rabbi in Amsterdam. They say, according to the legend, he's responsible for bringing the Jews back into England, because the Jews were originally kicked out of England in the 1200s. And he basically told, I think it was Oliver Cromwell, he told him that in order for Jesus or your Messiah to come back, so the Jews have to be scattered to all four corners of the world. And as long as they're banned from England, your Messiah is not going to come. So that convinced them to let the Jews back into England. Menashe ben Yisrael, a lot of very interesting Sfarim that he wrote. He wrote a sefer that said that the Native Americans are from the 10 lost tribes, lived in the 1600s. So Menashe ben Yisrael.
What was his name again?
Menashe ben Israel, or ben Yisrael, from Amsterdam. So he talks about, this is what I wrote. Rabbi Menashe ben Israel deflects the criticism that Jews commit idolatry by kissing the Torah scroll or rising in its presence, by differentiating between giving honor to something / someone, giving honor to something / someone, which is veneration, and praying or worshiping to somebody or something, which is adoration. So he says there's a difference between venerating something and adoring something. He explains that acts done to the Torah scroll or in its presence are in the first category and are thus not idolatrous. You're just giving it honor, you're not worshiping it. But the Gemara talks about if you kiss or you hug an Avodah Zarah, so that's also usher. That's what, yeah.
I'm sorry, we kiss the mezuzah, we kiss, the tefillin. I mean,
All right, because we're giving it honor. We're not trying to appeal to the mezuzah or the Sefer Torah to do something. And we're just we're giving it's a way of giving honor to Hashem. Hashem said, write a Sefer Torah, write a mezuzah, so that's why we kiss it. But the Gemara does say that if you kiss an idol, so a person is not chayiv misa for kissing an idol unless that's the way that the idol is normally worshipped, but it is usher to do.
What about some people who believe that the mezuzah protects them from evil on the wall?
Yeah, the Rambam talks about that. The Rambam says that there are some people that believe that, and the Rambam disagrees with that. Other people, the Kabbalists are more inclined to hold like that. People will tell you that the Rambam only said that because he didn't have Kabbalah or because he doesn't hold of Kabbalah. But this goes back down to the difference of opinion between what they'll call the mystics and the rationalists. Right? So it depends on how you look at it.
The Chamsa also, they have the Chamsa, like for protection or whatever.
I don't know. I'm not so familiar with the Chamsa. It's more of a Sephardi thing. But the word Chamsa, by the way, is Arabic, and the sin sound of the Chamsa, the sin or the Samach sound is interchangeable with the Shin, so it means 5 in Arabic, like Chamesh means 5 in Hebrew, which is interesting. But
because it's 5 fingers. It's 5 fingers.
What?
5 fingers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, they thought it was to protect against the evil eye. Sometimes they have an eye in the middle of the chamsa.
Yeah, like on the dollar bill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Masons.
Well, no, on the dollar bill, it's supposed to be symbolizing that God is always watching. It's not idolatry.
Yeah, it says on the dollar bill, "In God we trust."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's also a Jewish star on the dollar bill. There's
Yeah.
a Jewish star on the dollar bill made out of stars. That was done on purpose.
Yeah,
That wasn't-
because the Jews control the economy, right?
they gave the money for the creation of the country.
Rabbi Klein, I want to thank you very much. It was really fascinating. I'm very impressed. I don't know how such a young rabbi can know so much and have written all these forms. You must have started, I don't know, being very interested in these subjects since you were 15. I don't know. It's really unbelievable. Yasher Koach, Hashem should bless you and should help you to continue more. And it was really, really very, very interesting.
Enlightening.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Shkoyach.